Well, it's 2 minutes past the hour. I think it's time to start. Once again, thank you and welcome to the Magnolia 5.4 guided tour webinar. We have two presenters today, Christopher Zimmerman and Mikhail Gelyich. Each of them are developers in the Magnolia development team. So Christopher focuses on front-end web technologies. At Magnolia, he's got a key focus on making developers' experience with Magnolia better, happier, and more productive. Mikhail also focuses on the user interface and the front end. His key area of interest is usability. And at Magnolia, he focuses mostly on UI components, user interaction, theming, and so on. They'll each cover some different parts of 5.4, Christopher focusing more on the why we built 5.4, what the process was, and what the big picture is. And then Mikhail will dive into some of the technical topics behind. We also hope to set aside about 20 minutes for people to have free question and answer. So I encourage you to start thinking now about what topics matter most to you and get ready to ask questions. Also, if something isn't clear as we proceed, do feel free to ask a question, and I'll show you how in just a moment. First, I'd really like to know who everyone is. Whenever you do a webinar, you're always sort of presenting to air, and you don't know who exactly you're talking to. Now, we've got some idea from the names of people who registered because there are a lot of our friends in the audience, but we'd also like to know more specifically what you use Magnolia for, what you do, and so on. So we've got a few quick polls. I'll leave each one up for about a minute or until the majority of people have answered these questions. The key thing with these is helping us know who we're talking to, but also we'll share the results with you as well, so you know who else is in the audience. So first, we'd like to know what best describes your primary role in a technical project. Let me just launch this poll. Since this is a technical webinar, we've presumed that most people here are technical, and we've sort of geared the responses to that. And at 30 seconds, 81% have voted. Since it's a multi-answer, we can have more than a total of 100%. 3% said no role in technical projects. 80% said back-end. 77% said front-end. I know that most of us end up doing some of those roles in a typical project. 35% said project management, and 6% said other. I really wonder what those are. Okay. Next poll. Thank you for responding so quickly. The next thing we'd like to know is how much experience do you have with Magnolia? Are you just new to the system, or have you already built and deployed multiple complex projects? And at 33 seconds, 92% have voted. So 9% are completely new to Magnolia. 14% are learning. A quarter are novice. 28% are advanced, and 25% are expert. So that's a pretty wide spread. If it were a smaller, more focused group, we could tune our presentation more, but because it's broader, we'll try to cover more information, including background and such. If you do have a very specific question that's too basic or too advanced, we'll try to answer it after the webinar is finished. Two more to go. There's this one and then one more. So what's your experience with 5.4? Wow, at 40 seconds, 90% have voted. So 30% none, 57% I've browsed release notes. Of course, you can see the results here in front of you, but I'll also narrate them for the recording. 27% have downloaded 5.4 or a pre-release. 16% have completed the Hello Magnolia tutorial, which will make our docs writers really happy. And 19% have already started developing with 5.4. That's really fantastic. And the last question is, what key use cases are you facing right now for Magnolia? Because we only have 5 possible responses, these are big buckets, but that's okay. It still gives us a sense of what's most important to you. Okay, and at 45 seconds, 95% have voted. That's pretty great. So far and away, corporate sites with multi-channel, multi-language, and multi-site requirements. About a third, 28%, need it for a digital business or a digital transformation platform. 30% for e-commerce, 30% for extranets, intranets, or portals. And we grouped those because in many ways, the functionality you need for this range of applications can be quite similar. It's a similar use case in some ways, and 13% other. That's great. Thank you very much. Okay, and the last piece of housekeeping before we dig into the presentation is questions. So as we go along, there'll be times where we're unclear or where audio might cut out, or you might want an extra piece of information. Here's how you ask questions. You will have this GoToWebinar control panel popped up somewhere on your screen. It might look a little different based on your platform. There is one block to ask questions.
In 5.4 that promote a much quicker and easier development experience with Magnolia projects. Just a few words about myself. My name is Christopher Zimmerman. I go by Topher. I'm a developer, as you heard before. I have a long history with the web. I started out in Seattle, so of course I was doing Microsoft ASP at the time, but I've been through the whole gambit of working at an agency, freelancing, doing web startups, all with web technologies. Built a few simple CMSs along the way, as probably a few of you have as well. But I'm becoming more focused on front-end technology and the web platform because it's becoming so mature and exciting. I'm very pragmatic, so I'm the kind of guy who's very interested in getting from start to finish, rather than going into the details. And that was, being able to get to finish, being able to create something quickly was one of the reasons that I'm so attracted to a lot of modern front-end technology. I find I can always be very productive with these technologies. So I think given my background, you can understand why I'm so excited to present Magnolia's new features that really do make projects so much more straightforward to work on. So let's get into it. Breaking up my presentation into the problems, why we're doing it, the path that we took to find the solutions, then the bulk of it talking about the solutions themselves, and then getting into the light development, which is kind of what's made possible by the solutions that we have. So Magnolia CMS is very powerful. You can do amazing things with it with a great technical staff. However, it's not that simple. And we've seen a few projects where the staff didn't really match the Magnolia profile, where in the end they chose a different product. And so obviously we weren't happy about your project might not work out because the learning curve can be so steep. What are some of the problems? Well, the standard templating kit, as powerful as it is, it's showing its age. It's about a bit outdated, and it's quite inflexible. It was really designed for the state-of-the-art in the web a few years ago, and times have changed, and it's hard to shoehorn SDK with the latest development practices. Demo project is also outdated, which was not really convincing people that this was the platform they wanted to choose. There were obstacles in development. Maybe you've faced some of these problems with resources where you're not sure if it's coming from the class path or it's coming from your workspace. Working with configuration has been quite tedious with always having to export your bootstraps, and there's a lot of room for error there. And very common tasks require that you know Java development. So somebody coming, a typical front-end developer coming to Magnolia had quite a big learning curve to be able to start working with Maven and creating proper modules, etc. And there's just so much to learn. Just a few notes about SDK. As you'll see, this is sort of the starting of the whole 5.4 initiative. How complicated is it? How much is there to learn? Well, here's some numbers. There's 30 page templates. There's 70 component templates, 40 page dialogues, 60 component dialogues, 50 model classes, and 90 templates. So a grand total of 370 files. So yeah, once you know it, it's powerful, but it took a long time for new developers to get into it and find their way around it. So what's the path? I alluded to this got started around SDK. We knew we wanted to do an update to SDK. And so we started talking about SDK version 3, that sort of thing, how we could update it to modern technologies. But as we were working on it and started doing interviews, we realized that it's just about SDK. It's about how front-end developers are working with Magnolia and the obstacles that they're having. And from that, it expanded further to the broader topic, which 5.4 eventually is about, which is easing development for everybody and lowering the barriers to entry for new developers. So yeah, we realized, well, we've always known that although we know the internals of Magnolia best, you, the developers and partners, actually know Magnolia in use best. You know how it works on projects. So we knew that we wanted to involve you heavily in the process. So we started out with interviews. We had some workshops. We used the wiki extensively and the forums, the blog. Here's a mind map that we had from a workshop in 2013 already about SDK. After a first round of interviews and some of these other interactions, we put together a vision, a proposal of where we thought we could improve Magnolia to make it faster and easier for you. We sent that, so part of that vision was a realization that there does need to be a focus on the front-end developer, not just the Java developer. And so an idea was, if you imagine this graph, if being high on the graph represents that you know how to do the task, that you have capability, we wanted to extend it. We wanted to push out what a front-end developer could do. You also see author here. That ended up not being a part of 5.4, but we did expand it for front-end developers. We also had two kind of mantras that came out of it that we wanted to get feedback on. Removing obstacles. If there's things that are there for historical reasons, maybe they don't need to be there anymore. Maybe we can find an easier way to do them. For example, the resource loading or working with the Java environment. Another thing was just reducing complexity. How can we make things more consistent so that once you've learned it one time, you know how it's going to work in other places as well? And also just less stuff. How can we? Are there things that we can remove that aren't needed anymore? Because that obviously makes a platform easier to get into and understand. Right. So we came back to the community again. We put the proposal and the vision out. We put out surveys, and we got your input that way. It's interesting to note that this is the original survey, and the top 3 items are config by file, a new template set, so that's the update of SDK, and improved resource handling. And you'll see that these are the 3 things, plus some other things that we pursued. Also at the Magnolia conference in 2013, we presented this and got some very valuable feedback from the community that way. So I just want to say to everybody that participated, it was wonderful to see the Magnolia community in action. Thank you. You've helped us. You've helped to guide us to make the improvements that we're presenting today. And a really useful thing that came out of this whole kind of elaborate requirements gathering process is that we could trust ourselves to make big changes, significant changes in the platform. We could trust ourselves to really invest the time to make these improvements and not just try to rush them out. So we were able to be bold. So what did we do about it? Now we get to the solutions. I'm going to focus mostly on MTE today, but I also want to touch on these other 3 very important points, the configuration by file, which then Mikael will go into later in the second half in much more detail, and the harmonized resources. So what is MTE? It's Magnolia Templating Essentials. So the thing is, front-end technology, as we started to think about what we wanted to do, we started thinking about this SDK3 idea. What should we do? You know, what are the modern techniques? How are people doing web development now? We get a lot of requests for how can we use SDK with Twitter Bootstrap, that kind of thing. So is that what we should do? Should we create a new set of templates based on Twitter Bootstrap, since that's so popular, and rightly so? It's a great framework. No, we don't want to do that. We want to learn from the past. We don't want to be in the same position in another 5 years when the front-end technologies have moved on. So here's an analogy to help you think about how we're thinking about Magnolia Templating Essentials. We want to make Magnolia Templating Essentials something that's really stable. It's a part of the Magnolia platform. It's not something that's dependent on the front-end technologies. So this analogy is a tree. Think about every spring. You've got the new leaves or the flowers coming into bloom. That should represent the latest front-end technologies, the hot new trends that are coming and going so fast. And it also represents the projects that we make. We base our projects on the hot technology of the time. But that doesn't actually belong as part of the Magnolia platform. So think of the tree itself as being Magnolia, and the templating essentials, think of those as the branches on the tree. So it's what's connecting you from the platform, but it's still part of the thing that's always there. It's the branches. They're not going away every year, and they are your interface to the front-end technologies, and they support the front-end technologies. So MTE should be stable. It should be front-end agnostic. And it should be maintainable, testable, lightweight, and future-proof, like the rest of Magnolia. But let's think back a little bit. Let's have some context to where Magnolia is at today and where the SDK is at. 5 years ago, we didn't have a lot of these new highfalutin technologies. We didn't have LESS and SAS CSS pre-processing. We didn't have JavaScript dependency management with things like require.js. We didn't have Bootstrap and Foundation CSS. And so Magnolia at that time provided a lot of features to address those needs. And some of those are still useful today, but now these front-end technologies, these are what front-end developers already know from other projects. This is what there's a wonderful set of resources about. They're almost like web standards. In a way, and Magnolia shouldn't be trying to compete with them. That's just going to confuse developers. They're going to, not know which one to use. Or our system might get in the way of some of these other established front-end frameworks. So our idea is that with MDE and with Magnolia 5.4, we should rather embrace these technologies that are popular in the front-end world and make sure that anybody coming to a Magnolia project can use them and won't stumble. Another way to think of that is that it's very similar to what we already have with Magnolia, only on the back end. We have this concept of open suite development, the open suite platform, where Magnolia is something that you can connect to any enterprise backends, any systems, even have integrations for certain platforms. And the idea is that MTE is kind of like the open suite of templating. It opens the doors that you can use any of these popular front-end frameworks like Angular, Bootstrap, etc. So we've done a lot of SDK bashing. So what are we going to do about it? We're blowing it up. No, the point is that we're separating it. It used to be some features in SDK and this whole set of templates. So what we're actually doing now with 5.4 is something that we started in earlier versions, and that is we're taking the great features, the useful features for building projects in SDK, and we're bringing them into the platform. So almost basically the main features of SDK are still available. They're just not in SDK anymore. Here's a diagram to illustrate those features I just mentioned. So for example, the site feature of SDK is a very useful one, and it now has its own module, the site module. Many of the other features have been moved into the modules where they basically belong, like into multi-site or into categorization. Or RSS aggregator. And then there is a new module which is called MTE. So you might be asking, okay, if we move these features into the platform, then what is MTE itself? Some of the changes, like I mentioned, are in the other modules. So when we talk about Magnolia Templating Essentials, sometimes you don't know if people are talking about the whole concept, which is just a replacement for SDK, or if they're talking about the actual Magnolia Templating Essentials module. And right now I want to tell you what the module is itself. So it is some templating functions, such as search FN that you can use in your templates, and it is a collection of models, as you're familiar from Magnolia Templating. These are the main things. Now, we also have included dialogues and some templates, but we've really stripped down the templates to a bare minimum. We made sure that they're very flexible and generic, because what we are encouraging you to do as a best practice is really to embrace the Magnolia templating and create templates from scratch based on your project, or based on the components that you already use within your company. Many companies already have a set of front-end components that they use across projects. We want you to use those. You can do that very nicely with Magnolia. So we will provide you all of the sort of infrastructure, how you can wire that up to Magnolia, but you should use the template that makes sense for your project, which means either a custom one or one that you've used on other projects internally. So just to get into a little more detail, if we talk about the templating functions, many of these are supplied actually by other modules, like CMS FN, DAM FN, Image FN, the new Site FN that's in the Site module, categorization is in Cat FN, and then new in MTE is Search FN, and then we plan to release soon a Nav FN and maybe something like a Content FN for working with content apps. So kind of the the metaphor that you can use to think about SDK versus MTE is that SDK provided components. It was focused on these 90 different templates. It's kind of like Playmobil. You have a ready-built car or truck or fire truck that you need, or not that you need, but that you can use in a very specific way. And if that's exactly what you need, great, it's there and you can use it. But as soon as you want to get into making it fit your project, things start to get complicated because now you're doing all these modifications on these templates, and this can be very complicated quickly to maintain. In contrast to that, with Magnolia Templating Essentials, it's more like we're supplying you with the building blocks, like the Legos. So we give you all of the pieces that you need. We give you the wheels, we give you the gears, the blocks, the bars, and you build the exact components that you need for your project. Let's just take a look at how we can use one of these functions to accomplish something. So here's an example. This is actually from the demo project, which is a good place to learn about these new technologies. You don't need to understand all this code, but if we look at the top line, you can see we're using the search FN in our template, and it's a very nice method. Search content. So this is performing a search on one of your content apps. In this case, it's the tours content app. You have a query string, which is the actual string that a user is searching on. So you can imagine just a website, somebody's filling in a search form, and this is the code that's satisfying that search. You're telling it where in this workspace to search and what kind of nodes you want it to return. So now search results has all the results. If we want to get the number of records found, we have a records the size method for attribute of the search results. And then very easily we can craft the template that we need. And yours is probably going to look different for your project. So we can return the number of results found in this H3. And then later you can see in this list, in this list that we're very easily able to go through the search results. And again, the custom formatting that you need for your project. It's very easy to get a description. An excerpt is even prepared from the page, and you can get the image from the content item. So just an example of using one of the new search functions, one of the new templating functions. Yeah. So what do we provide in MTE? We're down from 370 things to 32 things. So there's the templating function I mentioned. There's some models. And there's some very simple generic templates, teasers for internal pages, external pages, for downloads, links, of course the good old text and image component, HTML component. So that's what's in MTE now. So one of your questions will certainly be, okay, what's happening with SDK? Should I start with MTE? SDK is still a part of Magnolia. We don't bundle it. We're not going to be doing new feature development on SDK, but it remains supported. If you're comfortable with SDK, you already know how to use it well, keep using it. But we're going to be focusing our development efforts on Magnolia Templating Essentials, and that's where we would recommend that you start new projects. With 5.4, we've released Magnolia Templating Essentials with version 0.5. We did that because we knew we weren't there yet. We weren't as far as we wanted to be to really complete the story of what the Essentials should provide. So that's why we chose 0.5. What's still to come is this navigation helpers, so that it's very easy to do navigation. Helpers for working with your content from content apps, and a much improved way of managing your resources. So a very simple kind of theme that doesn't get in your way. That was one of the complaints that we had. So we know we want to address that. The navigation, one of the reasons that this we feel needs to be done right, again, relates to content. You may be familiar from the demo project. We really want to show you how to work with content apps and structured content. And this adds some complexity to how you might want to build your navigation, because the navigation might not be generated just from the pages in your page tree anymore, but might be including categories or other things from other apps. So that's why we're investing time there. When should you start your project? Well, I think you should really feel comfortable with starting a project with MTE now. We will be releasing new versions of MTE regularly in the next few months, and we should be to a version 1.0 by early next year. The other thing I want to mention is that MTE is really just providing some of these models and templating functions, these helpful things. But you can start a project without SDK and without MTE. I mean, you're still going to be able to use all of the great templating features that we're encouraging you to use. You've seen in the diagrams before that many of the changes were integrating SDK features into the platform. So you don't even really need MTE to start your new project. But I would certainly encourage you to, because we will be at 1.0 soon. And this is just to emphasize that we know that you're concerned about migration and you don't need to migrate. MTE is something separate. So your SDK-based project is going to work in 5.4 without an extensive migration. There may be a few things you need to tune, but most of it is handled automatically. Okay, so that's the MTE topic. Now just a few words about configuration by file, one of the other important features. What this is all about is that a lot of the things that you used to configure in Admin Central, you can now do it directly in a file. So you can, this is part of this consistency. You can work in the same place where your template scripts are, where your resources are, where your code is. That's where you can work with your template definitions and your dialog definitions, and you can be proficient. You can use all of the shortcuts and great features of your IDE, copy and paste, etc. Searching, it's a very simple and readable format. And a key point is that your configuration isn't locked into JCR. It's always loaded. It's loaded at every restart. And this means you don't never need, when you're working with configuration by file, you don't need to export your configuration again. So this really makes it a much more streamlined process. I just wanted to show you a quick example of that. So this is from Hello Magnolia. This should look quite familiar to you. I mean, it's really the same structure as if you were working in the Admin Central configuration app. But it's just a text file. So template script, render type, visible, all the exact same attributes that you're familiar with, just in a different format. And yeah, Mikhail is going to get into details about this later. Another big topic is the harmonized resources. So what does harmonized mean? It means that all of your resources work in the same way. Your template scripts work in the same way as your template definitions, and this works in the same way as your traditional web resources. So you may have been confused in the past with having a bypass switch for your resources, and they're by default loaded from loaded from the workspace instead of the page, whereas your template scripts, those the other way around, or they're by default loaded from the class path, but you could override it. Now all of your resources work the same way. You learn it once, and you will understand how they all work. But there is another very important improvement to resources, which is that we have something called a loading cascade. So this is how it works. So you're basically, all of your resources, they can be, it checks first to see if they're loaded in your JCR workspace. And if they're not found there, it looks on the file system, which is something new. There's a special directory on the file system that your resources can be loaded from. And if it's not there, then it looks into your deployed jars, so into the class path. So all the resources follow this loading cascade, and this gives you great flexibility in how you want to work with Magnolia, as you'll soon see. And then I just wanted to touch on the new demo project. So the new demo project is what helps you understand how to use all these new technologies. It's versus the old demo project was more of a lorem ipsum thing. It didn't have a real story behind it. The new demo project is it's actually about a travel company, so it's much more realistic. You can understand the value of the different features, and you can download the project, of course, and look at how to use all the features that we've just gone through. And it also shows you what we mean about working with content apps. So much of the content and many of the pages are actually coming directly from content apps. Okay, so those were the four big pieces of the solution. But what I wanted to touch at the end of this is what the implications are. So those are the actual technical features, but what does this do for you as a developer with Magnolia? And that's something that we call light development. So this is what comes out of those features. A big part of that is what we call light modules. I mentioned to you before that the resource loading, it first looks in the workspace, then it looks into a directory on the file system, which is referenced from your Magnolia. What this means is that you can put all your resources, and remember now resources includes template scripts and all the definitions made possible by the config by file, in a directory, and they will be loaded. That means that you don't need a Maven module to work with Magnolia. So you can have just to give you an idea of what this looks like, you can have one directory. This is the light module, Hello Magnolia. This is the tutorial. There's a common structure to follow, a convention. So you can put your dialogues in the dialogues directory. There's a place for your components, and that quotation.yaml, that's the actual configuration, that's the dialog definition. Then you have your resources, where you can put your web resources. You have your templates, where you can put all of your template definitions and template scripts, all in one place, all without needing a Maven module. So this means that developers can develop in Magnolia without Java, just using a bundle or a set of jars and these special light modules. Yeah, so I wanted to emphasize that Magnolia loves front-end developers. They've been neglected for a long time, and now we're reaching out to make life easy for them as well. We're providing what you need and then getting out of your way, removing those obstacles. You make whatever it is you want to make, your cake, your web confection, and you can rely on Magnolia to provide all of the content managing, the user interface for that, the serving, the caching, the backend, all the stuff you don't want to worry about. If you're a front-end developer, you can choose Magnolia as a platform, even if you're not a Java developer. Leave the backend to Magnolia. So this means that now we have the two important pieces with Magnolia. As always, we have the stable, the scalable, highly available server infrastructure. It's based on Java, which is fantastic for integrations with existing enterprise systems, enterprise backends. And we have the fast, flexible, light front end for developing with the latest technologies to create the web projects that meet your customers' requirements. The other thing is that light modules enable a new style of agile deployment. It's not uncommon for for big companies to have very strict release processes, and this maybe deploying new jars only once a month. And this has been a problem for marketing teams who need to be more agile, who need to do updates sooner. So you can imagine that with light modules, you could do something like keeping your modules in a Git repository. You just update your Git repository, and you can pull directly from your servers. We actually already have enterprise customers doing this kind of, they had to build it themselves, but now Magnolia provides it out of the box. So now the conclusion. I hope that I've shown you how using light development can make development fast, easy, and fun. But some of you might have a raised eyebrow about all of this. It doesn't really make sense for your team. Light development, that doesn't sound like it's going to work for a big enterprise project. Well, I wanted to just have a few words on the significance of speed. This isn't just about finishing a project sooner. So maybe you're doing heavy-duty development with big projects. But the point is that using these new technologies, you'll be able to iterate faster. You'll be able to develop more agile. And I think that this is going to help you get your big projects right, because this iteration will help you really satisfy the goals of your project more closely. The other point is that even big projects start small. You have to get the project first. How do you get those? Well, often you have to do a POC and demonstrate to a customer that you can accomplish things fast on this platform. So I think that 5.4 can help you win more deals with faster and more convincing POCs. The other point is that it's not an either-or. It's not that you have to use light modules. Light development and Maven development are designed to work together. You'll see more of this from Mikhail when he gets into the details. But the main point is that the same exact structure that I showed you for the light module can be right in a Maven module. So it's depending on the members of your team, they can use one or the other. So you, based on your team and your project, can choose what makes sense. And I just wanted to say that just because we're focused in 5.4 on improving development, that doesn't mean this is just an advantage for developers. As I said before, I think it gives you the opportunity to win more projects, to implement projects better, to implement projects faster, to locate developers easier because they don't necessarily need to be skilled with Java, and your developers can be productive sooner. I didn't get to show you too much, but I'll put a link in the chat. This is to a video showing what development with 5.3 looks like versus 5.4, show you the improvements and how much easier it is. And I really encourage you to learn light development. You can do it in 1 hour with the Hello Magnolia tutorial. So if you remember the beginning with the Olympic freestyle skier doing the jump, the point is that with Magnolia 5.4, you don't have to have such a highly skilled technical team to be successful with Magnolia. Okay, thank you very much.
into a YAML format and how specific it is. So first about the story, yeah, these are the main overarching stories in 5.4. It's released for developers. We wanted configuration to get more trouble-free and safe. We wanted to develop self-development with Java. That's all captured within this. This is kind of a parallel definition for what a live module is versus the typical main module. So you see the directory structure, which encapsulates, let's say, the templates. So you have the YAML configuration file and the template script side by side. And actually, you just to move to a full-fledged mailing module, you just reuse that same directory structure, move it to your mailing module's resources, and that would be it. By configuration by start with, well, mainly because of the hassles of the JSR config. So it was usually crafted in the configuration app, moving quite a long time to click through. And then you ended up with verbose raw JSR exports that we knew as bootstrap files. And it was also persistent flavor of config, which means it was painful when developing, especially if you were collaborating with others. Sometimes you had to import, export, write a repository. It was also painful to upgrade the parameters and so on. With configuration by file, on the other hand, we bring a readable format, so we chose YAML for that. Well, because this, as Linus activity was readable. Ease of editing, so we just use a simple text editor. Config files, they give us, as shown in the live module structure, right next to the template scripts, so it's kind of all in one place. We do have file validation, so if you make a change on the file system in the web app structure, then it will be picked up. Same goes if it's on the class path, so we try really to observe the changes there. And then what you get, because it's file-based, it's also easier to collaborate with dev teams. So file is typically easier to diff, to import, export all over again. And finally, along with configuration by file, we've been expanded by the need, we've been also refactoring the registry, so we also cater to greater validation capabilities. This is what I call the unfair comparison, because it's the famous bootstrap file, and typically in there we only care about those 5 or 6 entries, key value properties, and yeah, a bunch of nodes. This is a config for a simple date field. This is how it looks in YAML. So yeah, really easy, straightforward. Now let's take a look at how it looks in the background. So registries, they've been around in Magnolia for quite some time. They collect all the various types of elements in the system, template definitions, dialog definitions. But up to 5.3, there was no common abstraction for all these registries. So they were a little bit duplicated all over the place. They were paired with observing managers that were bound to JCR, so we had to break this barrier so that we are also able to observe on other configuration sources. And yeah, it would know nothing if for example, bin resolution failed, then yeah, you would have a stack trace, but the registry wouldn't know anything about the entry. It wouldn't be able to tell you. So yeah, that was the outlook in 5.3. We had node to bin in the middle, so the managers were reading those definitions from the config JSR workspace and populating the registries. And most importantly, the configuration app was also bound, just a raw representation of what's in the JSR config workspace. With Magnolia 5.4, well, we still have the old config app somehow around for the time being, but the plan is to introduce then the new configuration app, and it will be tied at registry level. So it will not show you what's in the workspace, it will show you what is currently live on your system. So as you can see, we replaced the managers by common abstractions for configuration sources. We have a new map to bin component, which does the same as node to bin, but that helps us reading those YAML files. And we also keep same compatibility layer as we had before. If you were using configuration by code or Blossom, then you can still use it and register directly to your entities. This is the registry API. What's important in there is that each registry has a simple type, it has registry methods. What you get out of it is definition provider. So we gradually increase the knowledge about the objects that are present in the system. First, we get metadata, an ID, a location, where is it coming from? Is it YAML or JCR? Then we get a raw view, which is just a map representation of the configuration nodes, or yeah. And finally, out of it, we do the bin resolution, and the definition, we get a definition provider, and this one is able to tell you if the bin is valid or isn't. In the previous slide, I was talking about metadata builder. What it boils down to is this definition ID. So typically a template references a dialog by using this module colon relative path strategy, but we've also found other registries that use a different strategy, let's say just using the name of the definition itself. That's the case for apps, for example, or if you configure a link field, you just use the app name, and that's how it's known in the registries. So that's a sample registry implementation. You just declare a field type for it and what strategy you're using for the ID, whether it's module, column, relative path, or just the name. Or you can also build your own strategy if you want to. And as I mentioned before, the configuration source, now it's also bound to the registries. There's not much to grasp in there, not much fancy, but the essential part is that we have convenience builders, helpers, and these are the APIs that you want to reuse. You can implement your own configuration source, say to read configuration from JSON format, for example, that you could easily build upon that. And this is the Minister registry. Okay. So yeah, this brings just a registry facade. It enables you to query definitions by module, source, or type. So yeah, the registry facade exposes all types of registries that are living in the system, and basically this enables you to query for any kind of definition across different registries. And this is what the new configuration overview app relies on. We had a nice prototype of it that currently lives in the Forge. We will work on making it ready, then to bundle it sometime during the life of 5.4. So here's the little demo of it. Currently it's called config overview. You can see a list of all definition types that are living in the system. So you see all the definitions in the system. You see all the templates in the system. You see what module they come from. Yeah, same goes for templates. You can filter it by modules. Say I want to see only those definitions brought by MTE module, then that's how you get to it. You can also enter it by browsing it through modules. So see every module, what does it bring? This is the old configuration app. Was bringing was basically some JCR config, so you can browse it in tree-like manner, much like in the JCR app. But here is a YAML definition. You see here it's marked as class path. It actually means YAML file on the class path. And you can also browse it in a tree-like structure, but in the background it's actually a YAML file, and you can see it by clicking show file here. Now, what is also important is that you can filter also based on the source type, whether it's a file-based configuration or JCR-based, and you can also see whether you have some invalid configuration. So here is an invalid definition. Apparently, I misconfigured a class in my file, so it's telling me I know where the error is. I can go ahead and fix it. So off to the YAML format and its integration. So we rely on the YAML spec 1.1. The important part about YAML is that it's using indentation over enclosure marks. And there are mainly three types that you need to be aware of. First one is scalars, basic key value properties, can be strings or integers or booleans. Then you have sequences, which are really representation for lists. We use the dash notation for that. And finally, we have mappings. So you have this kind of nested key value structure, and you can mix and match all of them. How it's integrated with the config. We typically infer the name of the definition from the file name. That's essentially what this slide is about. I'm not sure I'm going to go through more details right now. This one is more interesting. So now YAML versus JCR. Basically, they use different but similar transformer components. So in one case, we have map to bean, we have node to bean. Both account for the class property. Let's say if you want to specify what concrete class you want to use for a specific definition, and they account also for type mappings that are different in the system. In JCR you can use extends. In YAML you would use includes or references or merge keys. We'll expand on that in the next few slides. And also the sequences and mappings for lists or maps, they have a different representation in both worlds. In JCR you always represent it with nodes and subnodes. In YAML you have to do this differently. So yeah, here is an example of that. This is tab definition, so it's using a list of field definitions to get the fields. In JCR, it looks like just subnodes. In YAML, you have to use the dash notation. Now, if you look at a map example, it looks exactly the same on the JCR front, but in the YAML file, it's actually different. We have to use the mapping syntax. We may well close the gap on that one because JCR node to bin was tolerant in that regard. We might also want to do the same for YAML, and we actually also have the issue somewhere in the backlog, so we'll work on that. But for now, you have to be aware of that pitfall. Now, some advanced YAML to start with: document references. This is a standard feature of the YAML spec. So you can just declare a anchor-like tag and then reference it by using a pointer syntax. And expanding on that, this is also standard YAML. It's called merge keys. So you can also reference another node of the YAML document and let's say add properties and so on. It might not work well for big nested structures though, so beware about that. And finally, we have a custom include directive for modularizing the YAML files. So it's Magnolia specific, and you can just include another generic column, for example, by using the absolute path within the root of resources. Yeah, that's about it. And yeah, this is just an overview of the typical workflow now in if you're developing, let's say, an app, content app based on YAML. So this was during the beta phase. The resources app used to be configured as YAML. So I had a bunch of columns. I had the editable column that was only showing an icon if an entry was editable. And well, if I wanted to change that, I would just switch to the IDE. Here was the YAML configuration. So it was living in the resources app module, yeah, I was using this Boolean property column definition that is newly introduced. But that's just a convenience to set which icon or label to use in case a property is true or false. Here I'm just changing the false icon to display a read-only icon and saving the file. Then we just wait a little bit for the system to pick it up. We should see it in the logs below. Yeah. There we got it. So right now we can just go close the app, start it again. That's how we see the config changes for apps, and there we did see the change immediately reflected in the app. So no need to restart the server or anything like that. We observe those YAML files and react appropriately. So another thing to notice is that the journey only begins. So we've updated hopefully the most important registries so far: templates, dialogues, apps. But we will also upgrade more registries in the future so that you can use config by file as well for, let's say, REST endpoints or personalization traits. We will also move more typical configuration to registries so that you can also use them in files. That's the case most importantly for the app launcher layout. And we will also be continuously working on productizing and bundling the new config overview app and also integrating it with the editing capabilities in the JCR app. And how about auto-suggest? Well, we'll also, again, try to revive the effort and not bring it only for the JCR tree, but also, let's say, if we have a code editor that presents the YAML file in the admin central, then we would also bind the auto-suggest feature to this one so that you have the best of both worlds. So yeah, with that, I thank you. I hope I didn't overlap the time too much. And now it's time for questions.
All right. I'm sorry about the audio complications. Hopefully things are better now. At least that's what people report through questions. We have many questions. and that's pretty fantastic. We might not have enough time to answer all of them, but we'll do our best. And those that we can't answer in session, we'll answer afterwards. So I'm going to start in no particular order and keep quickly queuing the questions while the guys answer. Let's start with an easy one. When moving from 5.3 to 5.4, is it just a POM version change, or do we have to touch our code as well?
There might be some minor API changes here and there, as there usually is between one version and another. I don't have the list out of my mind, but it should be mostly straightforward. We have upgrade tasks in most cases. We have migration tests that ensure that you can actually migrate from 5.3 to 5.4, from 4.5 to 5.4 as well. What you need to be mostly aware of is if you were using STK or not, because 5.4 is no longer bringing STK. So in case you still want to use it, you have to add dependency to STK 2.9. We're also working on providing the STK bundle so that you can re-add it easily in case you were using it, but that's the main pitfall to look after. Yeah, it is mentioned in the release notes.
Okay, next question is, in some cases, a development religious war, I think. Why YAML and why not JSON?
Well, we thought about that in the first place, and well, there was just some consensus that was reached internally, so that the format is super lean, and that you can also that it also has kind of a tree-like structure, much like you are familiar with in case you were working with JSON nodes. So it somehow looks familiar, and there's no visual noise brought by the additional syntax. I know some guys actually prefer to have this kind of syntax over indentation because it's a little bit the recurring argument over YAML, but we actually think it really makes it easy to work with, and let's say to cater with diff or whatever. It just works nicely in our opinion.
Okay, next question, also YAML related. Do you plan to implement extend functionality in YAML files rather than just include? If this is part of our plans, do we know when it'll be roughly released?
There is no exact plan to bring the exact same extends feature as we had in Node2Bean. Well, the reason is that it was serving some purpose, and let's say if you wanted to replace actually or add some functionality within Magnolia, you would use extend and replace another component, and it's not much more flexible than include actually. What we are working on in the for the future is actually what we call decoration. So if you bring your own module and you want to add a feature to Magnolia or to several apps at the same time, or you shouldn't have to just replace an app or do an extend or do this kind of stuff. You just should just be able to decorate one node. Say this decorator adds these few actions to an app, or so well. It's not fully ready yet, or well, quite not ready actually, but we'll be working in this direction to make flexible, to make the whole platform more flexible, and yeah, that's what I can say about it.
Okay, next question. Is SearchFN providing a search across different workspaces? Now in the new demo, there's a lot of content type coming from different workspaces. How is this handled?
Basically, in SearchFN, you can perform search in any workspace. You can't perform one search across workspaces and aggregate it. That's not provided. We wanted to cover, the basic use case. I think if you want to do a search across workspaces, then it's probably time to start looking at like an indexing search using the Solr module, something like that.
Okay. How can I mix the templating functions of MTE with the STK functions? which have sometimes the same names but not the same functionality?
Well, basically the templating functions are by and large the same between SDK and MTE. I think we removed maybe one or two, but mostly they're all still there. The thing that we did do is we moved some of them. So maybe they're in a different templating functions. We added this site functions. So it's a templating functions library that's in the new site module. And that's where some of the ones went that used to be in the 5.3 templating functions. But if you're on 5.4, there's just one templating functions library. So that's the place. That is to say, the actual CMS FN is the successor to what was in 5.3, and just a few functions have moved.
Okay, next question. Will the form module be rewritten for MTE as well? And is there a plan for it?
There's not a set plan. I saw that was asked a number of times. And there are a few modules that we need to address. Somebody asked about the logging module as well. The forum module depends on SDK. So I think we have a situation. Well, first of all, you can still use SDK with 5.4. But second of all, as SDK is going away, we'll have a situation that was like when we went from Magnolia 4 to Magnolia 5. There's a few modules that are going to take a while to catch up, to work with MTE. I don't know what the time plan is, but yes, the intention is to make them work with MTE. And we will create additional documentation about that so you can track the progress on that.
Will we keep the old SDK-based demo available on some different demo server?
Yes, the intention, that's been brought up a few times here. That would be very valuable.
Great. I'm still working with the backlog of questions. Now I'm getting to the ones that haven't been answered and are still showing up in the question interface. Just looking through. Question, do you think to make a market with the component templates of the community? And I'm assuming this is something like, say, one of the marketplaces for WordPress templates. We've discussed things like this, but we don't have any concrete plans at the moment. We know that some sort of ecosystem to support people sharing things based on Magnolia is important, but we also recognize that many of our current partners and heaviest users work in situations where they don't tend to share resources like this, but we're certainly looking at it and are interested in it. Next question is, and one moment, I'm going to mute everyone else but me. Okay. So, what are our plans for the Blossom module? I wish that I had Tobias Matson here, who maintains the Blossom module, so I can't give an authoritative update here. As near as I know, we plan to continue supporting Blossom as we've supported it since its inception. You should be able to continue to use it just as you've used it in the past. Okay. Going through all the questions to see what I may have missed. Okay. Do we plan to do other canned demos like Magnolia Travels, say one that focuses more on specific business cases like an e-commerce case?
There is not a concrete plan for that, but that is definitely something that's come up a number of times. There's a lot of interest in that, both from the community and within Magnolia. But we don't have a concrete plan for that yet.
Okay. And I keep going. Question here is that it would be good to have a search through assets, or even inside digital PDFs. Is this something that we plan to implement? I assume specifically here someone wants to be able to search through assets from a website implemented in Magnolia.
That sounds like it would be useful, but it is not currently scheduled.
And I'm continuing to go through questions. Thanks to everyone who notes when echo comes back. Okay, now I know that I missed a question, probably a couple of questions from Marvin. Let me dig in for one moment. Yes. Can I use the new resource loading in conjunction with the STK?
Well, we've got the new resource loading mechanism. It's actually rather independent from whether you use STK or MTE. The main thing that you might be interested in is that the /resources handle is deprecated unless you're still using processed resources. That's actually one that could be the decision points, because right now we don't have processed resources with the new resources APIs. But otherwise, yeah, you can just use the new resource loading cascade by just using the same as the old class pool servlet, like the /.resources, and there you just then you can just serve those resources either from ClassPath, file system, or JCR resources workspace.
So the next question is more of an observation. It is that someone tried to migrate an STK project from 5.3.9 to 5.4, but there were problems migrating the resources app from the old one to the new one. And do we have a tutorial for that or other information? I don't think we have specific information for that yet. I've urged the person to write a bug report, and we'll see what we can do to identify the issue and deal with it.
What I can add maybe to this is that indeed the resources app is a little bit in an early stage right now, but we'll also again hear about the feedback and try to restore as many functionality as possible. The old resources app is still available somehow in the background if you call it resources-legacy somehow, but it's really it's hidden, so it's just a tip, but you shouldn't use it in the long run.
So we've had this question a couple of times now in different ways. Does the configuration by file mechanism listen to file changes and apply them without needing to restart Magnolia?
Well, yeah, I replied also to that earlier on. Well, basically, yeah, we have file observation, we have class observation. Well, they basically serve different purposes. Let's say if you're developing within your IDE, you most likely work with an exploded war, and you want the changes on the class path to be reflected. That is probably a little bit less likely to occur in on a production environment that you hot swap the class path jars at runtime. But if you do have YAML files on the file system in the web app directory, then they will be picked up. Or if you're using the JCR workspace to put those configuration files, then they will also be picked up. So let's say an admin can also do a hotfix by just going to the new resources app, creating a hotfix for it, and activating that hotfix.
Okay, this is more of a feature request than a question, or at least it's a question, but it should be a feature request. Is there a migration script to help automatically generate the YAML file from the configuration in Admin Central in 5.3? That to me sounds like magic, but has that been discussed at all?
This is something that is currently being worked on, a basic export functionality from the old JCR configuration tree. So yeah, we're working on that.
So we still have a few questions that we haven't answered. It's 6:20 now. I imagine that our presenters probably want to go home. With those questions that remain open, I'll do my best to get them answered in the follow-up email that I'll send out. That'll go out on Friday or on Monday, depending on how much time is required. I'd really like to thank everyone for how many questions they asked, and for, of course, our presenters for presenting and answering questions. Also, thanks for telling me when there was an echo. I got a lot of messages like that. And with people having so many questions, we're pretty easy to engage with. Keep in touch. We're not quite as responsive on the forums. It's easier to get us when you've got us in a webinar, but keep asking those questions there. And we'll be doing a good number of webinars in the near future on related topics, often a bit more focused. So we have plans to do a presentation or a webinar just on the YAML-based mechanisms in 5.4 to help people understand them, see them in use, and so on. If you've got requests or suggestions for upcoming webinars, write us and let us know. It's pretty easy to do that on the forums. You can also write me directly, and I will put my email address in the chat window right now. So, despite participants not being able to see the chat window, organizers can use it to send messages. So I've done that. Feel free to write, and thanks again for attending. We'll send out a recording and slide decks and all that good stuff in a couple of days. Thanks all. Thanks, Mika. Thanks, Topher. We look forward to seeing everyone at the next webinar.